Hi class, this is Dr. McGonigal with another lecture for your Research Methods 2 course. Today we're going to talk about measurement of study variables. So how will you operationalize or measure the constructs that you are proposing to study in your paper 2? Well, for this class, for paper 2, the measures were chosen for you. But if you were conducting your own study, in which you had to create your own survey and collect responses, how would you know what are good measures to use for your construct? The answer is that you need scales that are good quality. And how do we determine good quality in psychological research? Well, the answer to that is that your measures should be valid and reliable. In terms of reliability, what we mean by that is they should be consistent in their measurement of that construct. And in terms of validity, we're going to focus on two types. First, they should actually measure the construct they are supposed to measure. And second, they should fully measure the construct that you want to measure and not leave parts of it out. In psychology research, we often use a set of related survey questions, also called items, to measure a construct. Here's an example construct for you, job satisfaction. And one particular job satisfaction measure contains 3 items or 3 questions to measure job satisfaction. Question 1 is, in general, I don't like my job. Question 2 is, all in all, I am satisfied with my job. And question 3 is, in general, I like working here. Participants would choose their response based on 1 being strongly disagree, 2 being disagree, 3 being neutral, 4 agree, and 5 strongly agree. So that's one way that we could measure a variable, a particular variable of job satisfaction. I should note here that surveys are only one method that's used in psychological research. They are the method we are focusing on mostly for this next part of Research Methods 2, due to the data that you have available for your use in that project, which is survey data. There are usually other ways to operationalize your variables, and they all have pros and cons. So remember that because we're talking about psychology, a lot of the things that we're trying to measure cannot be measured tangibly. So for instance, job satisfaction. We have to approximate people's levels of job satisfaction by asking them questions about how they feel about their job. There are pros and cons to every measure, like I said, and all of the cons threaten internal validity. So I want you to think, as you're listening to this video today and reading the course material, about how any measure that you might use may threaten the internal validity. So what are some of those pros and cons, and what effect might they have on how confident you can be that your study results are due to the manipulation or the predictor variable in your study, that what you're observing is accurate and true. So let's think about some questions to consider about survey measures. So number 1, why do we use multiple items or multiple questions? So you can see here on the previous slide that we use 3 questions that are very similar to one another. So why don't we just ask 1 question? Why do we have to ask 3? Well, the answer to that is that we usually think that there is some degree of error or variation in how people are answering the questions. So maybe they misread a question, maybe they weren't paying attention to a question. So by asking something similarly more than once, we can be more confident in the fact that their answers are a true representation of what they intended to be, particularly if they have good internal consistency reliability, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Question number 2, what is this type of response scale 1 to 5 called? You may have heard this in other psychology classes that you've taken, but this scale of 1 strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree is referred to as a Likert type scale. Question 3, how do we arrive at a single score or number to use in our analyses? So you'll see here that we have 3 items, and so for each item, participants are giving a response from 1 to 5. And so we need a way to combine their answers to those 3 questions so that we have one number that we're working with, not 3 individual numbers. So how do you think we arrive at that single score? Well, if you were thinking that we take an average of the 3 numbers that they provide to those 3 items, you would be correct. And that's what you'll be doing also for your paper 2. Question number 4, why is there an asterisk next to item 1? So let's look back at item number 1. In general, I don't like my job. Now let's look at it in context of the other 2 items. Number 2, I am satisfied. Number 3, I like working here. Well, hopefully you noticed that number 1 is written in the reverse of numbers 2 and 3. In other words, if you answered strongly agree for I don't like my job, then you should be answering disagree or strongly disagree for I am satisfied with my job. Because if you agree that you don't like your job, you shouldn't be agreeing that you are satisfied with your job. So we call item 1 a reverse coded item. And before we conduct any analyses or we average these 3 questions together, we need to recode the responses to number 1 so that we can be sure that for each of our items, we're measuring degree of satisfaction with the job and not degree of dissatisfaction. In terms of measure quality, it is critical that we use measures that actually assess what they are supposed to assess and relate to other constructs as we expect them to, or that they are valid, and they measure construct consistency, that they are reliable. So let's talk about reliability in more detail first. Reliability refers to the consistency of a measure. So if you think about it in terms of a car, if you have a very reliable car, that car is consistent, it always starts for you, it's dependable. That's kind of one way that you can think about it. We have different forms of reliability that we pay attention to in psychological research. The first is reliability or consistency over time, and that's referred to as test-retest reliability. The second is reliability or consistency between different people providing the ratings or different raters, and that is called inter-rater reliability. The third type that we'll talk about today is between different items in a scale that measures one construct, and that's called internal consistency reliability. Good reliability tells us that the differences in scores are meaningful and trustworthy. So, for example, if you weighed yourself now and 10 minutes from now, and you weighed the same both times, you would say the scale is reliable. However, if you weighed yourself now and 10 minutes from now, and you got very different results, you would question whether the scores that you're seeing on the scale are meaningful and trustworthy. Here is an example of very high test-retest reliability. So you can see that we have different participants: Sally, Susan, John, Enrique, Sonchi, Eric, and Tom. Each participant has a measure A score at time 1 and a measure A score at time 2. So at both times, they're assessing measure A. We don't know what measure A is, but it's measure A. It's the same thing. So Sally had a 78 at time 1 and a 79 at time 2. Susan had 62 at time 1 and 59 at time 2. John had 99 at time 1 and also a 99 at time 2. So if you scan the rest of these, you can see that pretty much people are consistent over time in the scores that they're providing for measure A at the different time points. In fact, if we were to calculate a correlation between everyone's scores at time 1 and everyone's scores at time 2, we would find that that correlation is 0.99. That correlation of 0.99 is very close to 1, which means that it is very strong. So in this example, again, you have very high test-retest reliability. Inter-rater reliability is used when you have 2 or more judges or raters who are observing behavior, making judgments, or coding responses. One example of inter-rater reliability could be when you are in a job interview and you have more than one person in that interview who is taking notes and rating you as a job candidate. Inter-rater reliability is used to assess the extent to which raters agree with one another. So you can take a correlation between the observations of raters, and if ratings are reliable, the correlation should be high, for instance, greater than 0.8. Some other measures that are used to determine inter-rater reliability include Cohen's kappa and an interclass correlation, or an ICC for short. Here's an example of very high inter-rater reliability. So you have participants Jim, Doug, Francis, Dominique, and Xavier, and you have two raters, rater A and rater B. So for Jim, rater A gave a 78 and rater B gave a 79. For Doug, rater A gave a 62 and rater B gave a 59, and so forth and so on. So if you were to calculate the correlation between rater A and rater B overall, again, you would see that it's 0.99, which is a very strong correlation. That's evidence of very high inter-rater reliability. In survey research, we are most often concerned with something called internal consistency reliability. This has to do with assessing the degree to which multiple questions or items in a scale correlate with one another. So the statistic that we use to determine internal consistency reliability is called Cronbach's alpha. And you can also see the symbol here. It looks like a little fish. It's an alpha, a Greek lowercase a. And this is based on the degree to which different items in a scale correlate with one another. So if the items are measuring the same construct and they are coded in the same direction, so they're all meaning higher levels of job satisfaction or higher levels of whatever construct you are assessing, higher numbers meaning higher levels, then they should relate to one another, correct? Well, I'll give you an example on the next slide to walk you through that. Alphas range from 0 to 1 and are usually considered adequate at 0.7 or higher. An alpha below 0.6 usually indicates a serious problem with the measure. And negative alphas can result from failing to recode negatively worded items. So in the example we went over at the start of this video of job satisfaction, if I failed to recode that first question where it was assessing higher levels of dissatisfaction, then I would probably get a negative alpha, and that would be a signal to me that I have a problem and I need to go back and recode my data. Here's an example of a scale. This is the Organizational Commitment Scale from Meyer, Allen, and Smith. Item 1 is I would be very happy to spend the rest of my career with this organization. 2, the organization has a great deal of personal meaning to me. 3, I feel a strong sense of belonging to my organization. 4, I feel emotionally attached to my organization. Do you think this measure has high reliability, high internal consistency reliability? In other words, if you were to answer these questions, or if you were to look at data where participants answered these questions on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 was strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree, do you think they would generally be correlated with one another? So do you think that someone who answered that they'd be very happy to spend the rest of their career there would also respond that they agree that their organization has a great deal of meaning to them? Would they also agree that they feel a sense of belonging and that they feel emotionally attached to their organization? Well, the answer is that it does typically have high internal consistency reliability. So usually coefficient alphas that you will run on this particular scale range around 0.8. So 0.8 is higher than 0.7, so that tells us that this scale has an adequate level of internal consistency reliability. So internal consistency reliability can be calculated separately for each sample that you use with that particular scale. Let's now talk about validity as another measure of the quality of our measures. Different types of validity exist. We're going to focus on two for this class. The first is called face validity, and this means, does the measure appear to be capturing the construct it is intended to measure? Does it seem valid for measuring this particular variable? So if we look at the example that we just went over for organizational commitment, and we think about what organizational commitment is. So that's the degree to which someone feels committed to their organization and intends to stay with their organization. And we look at the questions that are being asked about organizational commitment. Well, knowing what we know about organizational commitment, this scale does appear to be face valid. It does, to me, look like it's measuring what we know organizational commitment is. So the answer to how we can determine this is we learn about the variable and we take a look at it. And we think about whether or not it seems valid or accurate for capturing that particular construct. The second type of validity we'll talk about for this class is content validity. Content validity is referring to whether or not you're capturing the full scope of your construct. For instance, if I wanted to help develop a test for graduating psychology majors that was meant to assess their knowledge of psychology overall, and I only included questions about clinical and social psychology, my test would not have content validity, because in fact I would only be including two components of a wide field that includes lots of other subfields. For instance, industrial organizational psychology, health psychology, developmental psychology, all of these different things would not be captured. So how do we determine content validity? Well, the answer is that we ask subject matter experts, and for your paper 2, you will be the subject matter expert. You will be learning about your constructs for this class, and you will be determining whether or not, based on your knowledge of that construct, the measure that you're using for your paper number 2 is content valid. So is there something missing from it that you think should be added to it if you were to repeat that study in the future, or if someone else was to do that study? In your discussion section of your paper 2, you should comment on your assessment of the content and face validity of your measures based on what you learned. Think about the fact that problems with face validity and content validity could possibly threaten the study internal validity. Well, how so? Remember how internal validity has to do with the degree of confidence that we have that what we're observing in terms of our study results are due to our predictor variable or our study manipulations. So it's hard for us to have confidence in believing that the study results are accurate and valid if the measures that we're using in that study are not themselves valid. Reliability and validity are different concepts. They're both tapping into the quality of the measures that we're using in psychological research, but they are different things, and hopefully that has come through during this lecture today. Overall, like I said earlier, you can think about reliability as consistency and validity as accuracy. Can you think of an example of a situation where a measure is reliable but not valid? I'll give you a minute to think about that. A situation where a measure is reliable but not valid. So I'll give you one example, and it has to do with the example that I used earlier of a scale. So if you weighed yourself now, and then you weighed yourself 10 minutes from now, and you found that it gave you the same result, that result could be considered reliable, right? It's the same over time. It's consistent. However, what if it gave you a result that was really a lot lower or a lot higher than your actual weight? You knew that it could not possibly be correct. Well, in that case, the measure would be reliable but not valid. Next, we will talk about types of data and a major distinction that's going to be very important for you to keep in mind with data going forward in this class. The first type of data is quantitative data. And in quantitative data, the numbers are meaningful. An example is an exam score out of 100 points. So the more points, the better the score. So if you get a 90 on the test out of 100, you know that you did better than if you got a 20 on the test out of 100. Another example is a rating of self-esteem on a scale from 1, which is low self-esteem, to 5, which is high self-esteem. So if you score a 4.5 on the measure of self-esteem, you know that that's higher than someone who scored a 1.2 on the same measure of self-esteem. The numbers are meaningful. The second major type of data that we're going to talk about today is categorical, or also known as nominal data. For categorical or nominal data, numbers are not meaningful on their own. Some examples include race and ethnicity, eye color, hair color, and college major. For categorical and nominal data, we can attach numbers to the categorical and nominal data if we want to. And in fact, a lot of times you will see data sets where there are numbers for categorical or nominal data. However, the numbers that are attached to them are not inherently meaningful numerically. So what does this mean? Let's take the example of college major. So say we have a data set where psychology majors are coded with the number 1 and communications majors are correlated with the number 2. Does this mean that communication majors are higher or better than psychology majors? No, of course not. It just means that psychology majors are assigned a value of 1 and communications are assigned a value of 2. In this case, 2 is not meant to indicate numeric value. It's only used so that we know that people with a 2 are communication majors. So why do we need to know this distinction between quantitative data and categorical or nominal data? Why is this so important? The reason is that the type of variable, whether it's quantitative or categorical, will dictate the type of statistical analysis that you can use. And this will become more apparent as we continue on this conversation. In your statistics class, you probably learned about levels of measurement, and you learned that there are 4 levels of measurement. The first is nominal or categorical, which we just went over. The second is ordinal, the third is interval, the fourth is ratio. So for ordinal, interval, and ratio data, the numbers do have some inherent numerical meaning, right? An ordinal variable provides a rank order. So you know that someone who is rated a 4 is ranked higher than someone who is a 3, and so forth. Interval is a rank order, but also has equal intervals between. Ratio is a rank order with equal intervals between, plus a true 0. In terms of your paper 2, I wanted to make one important point, which is that when you're looking at variables for your paper 2, think about what kind of scale is being used for your variables. So categorical or nominal variables are fine to use as predictor variables for your paper 2. Just make sure to be clear on the coding and how to interpret the results. So if you have, if you are using gender, for instance, as a categorical predictor, and you have 1 of male, 2 is female, and maybe 3 is non-binary or other, then you need to make sure that you are reporting that in your results. So it's fine to use as a predictor variable, but do not use categorical or nominal variables as outcome variables for your paper 2. And the reason for that is, statistically speaking, the types of analysis that you use when you have a categorical outcome variable are sort of beyond the scope of what we are going to cover in this class. If you do have a categorical or nominal variable as your outcome variable, don't panic. Just come talk to me and we will figure out what to do for your analysis. In these last two slides for today, I am going to provide an example for demonstration purposes to show you how we are moving from picking a topic to creating some hypotheses and having our variables listed and thinking about the method. Okay, so let's say I want to better understand commitment to attaining a college degree. My overall research question is, why are some students so committed and persevere through college and others drop out? After reading up on a number of factors, I choose one that I found in my literature review. I decide to use self-regulated learning theory from Bandura to build the argument that self-efficacy will positively relate to students' commitment to attaining a degree. Why? How? Well, the reason is self-efficacy refers to confidence in one's ability to successfully complete tasks. So people who believe in their abilities are more willing to persevere or strive to continue, even in the face of adversity, because they believe they can ultimately succeed, according to Bandura. Therefore, higher levels of self-efficacy for college tasks should relate to higher commitment to attaining a college degree. In this case, my variables are self-efficacy, which is a predictor, and commitment to attaining a bachelor's degree, which is my outcome. My hypothesis 1 is that college self-efficacy positively relates to commitment to attaining a bachelor's degree in college students. So, kind of continuing on with this example, my participants were college students at a large public university in the southeastern U.S., and my procedure was an online survey administered using Qualtrics software. My measures are, first of all, I use the College Self-Efficacy Inventory from Soldberg and colleagues, and this included 14 items with an 11-point response scale ranging from not at all confident, which is 0, to extremely confident, which is 10. A sample question in this inventory would be, how confident are you that you could successfully complete the following tasks? Do well on your exams. The second measure, based on my outcome variable, is commitment to attaining a bachelor's degree from Gloria in 1993. This is a 5-item scale with a 7-point response scale ranging from strongly disagree, which is 1, to strongly agree, which is 7. And a sample question is, please indicate the extent to which each of the following is true. I am committed to attaining a bachelor's degree. So this is meant as a preview of what you will need to think about going forward for your paper number 2. You will be talking about your participants, you'll talk about your procedure, and you'll talk about your measures, and you'll provide some of this same information in those sections for your paper 2.